Good morning, Wendy.
And they're twice it's very complete to get a video. And then how you researched about that. Can you hear us, Harvey?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You really understand the problem. You have
There you go.
ideas for solutions.
Did you notice any improvement in room 5 at all? Or y'all aren't going in there at all? We're sharing earbuds. Are y'all in the conference room?
We're both fully vaccinated.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You're frozen. Let's see what happens if everybody else joins.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think with a lot of people in the house, it gets harder and harder to keep enough bandwidth. There you are.
I don't know why it took 3 times, but you can hear me now?
Yeah, I think we must be having bandwidth issues.
Probably.
Hey, late. Oh, actually, y'all are clear as a bell. How come Wendy's not?
You guys.
No idea.
My computer.
Wendy's choppy, but y'all are like,
Want to just come on the eyes?
What? Just, I'm gonna close out. We'll just listen. If you can take your headphones out.
Okay.
there they are. Hey, y'all. There's Dr. Bey.
Good morning, everyone.
We've got parents joining, we've got people coming from all over.
Hi.
I got it. Hannah's outside. Awesome. Mila's outside. Sammy. Hey guys, I like the various locations in the house.
We like to spread out.
That's awesome. So I'm just here. All I'm going to do is introduce you guys and say hey again. I'm back in the US, so I'm in the cold air conditioning and just looking outside. No birds or anything interesting though. And my food is much more boring.
Yeah.
So this is Dr. George Bey. I think I put it in my email. Dr. Bey is one of the experts in Maya archaeology and Maya studies, particularly known for, of course, his videos that we've sent you, some National Geographic specials that have already come out and some that are yet to come. And I think George, aren't you filming one for French TV now?
Yeah, it's out. It's in German and French. I sound really good dubbed in French. There's an English version which I could share with you, Harvey. It hasn't been released for distribution in the US. I'm also appearing on Sunday nights on Discovery Plus here in the US on Unexplained something or others, which is
Ooh, it's the UFO theory that I
yeah, something kind of anti-UFO, like a bunch of boring science made to look really good. And we say a lot. I noticed that all the archaeologists say, if this is true, this is a game changer. So
Well, so let me just introduce George. George, this is everybody, and
Hey,
you guys are
everybody.
from the International School in Atlanta, Georgia, correct?
Well, not quite. Sarah and I are from Atlanta, Georgia.
That's it.
But I'm the mom and Sarah's a student. It's actually based out of New York City.
Oh.
But our founder is from New Zealand, I believe, right? The founder of the school's from New Zealand, and she started the school 10, 12 years ago. It's an international traveling boarding school, and in non-pandemic years, you travel to 4 different countries and dive into, well, they can tell you better than I can, you tell them.
yeah, I would like to hear more about this before I get started. What you
Okay, I can explain a bit.
good, and you are?
I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you.
So basically our school is a international traveling high school.
Okay.
We have a project-based curriculum, so most of our studies are self-designed and self-motivated based on our individual passions.
Cool.
So usually we go to 4 countries a year.
Okay.
Kind of like a 4-term schedule for about 8 weeks.
Excellent. And how many years do y'all do this? Is this a 1-year program or a multiple year program?
It's a fully functioning high school.
Okay, so
we
you so-
but it's only 3 years.
okay, so over the 3 years you would usually visit 12 different countries?
Yes.
That rocks.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased to as you may or may not know, Harvey may have told you, I've been for a long time the Dean of International Education too at my school. So I really am like Harvey, we're huge proponents of an internationalized curriculum. You probably represent one of the most impressive internationalized high school curriculums I've ever encountered. So are you all different years or are you all the same year?
Yes, we have like, we're in the 3 different years. Like we have.
Okay. And who are you? Who are you?
I am Guille from Spain,
Okay. What part of Spain?
Canary Islands.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
One of the most environmentally interesting places on the planet, I think.
Yeah.
So people have come from all over the world to this high school. The high school is in New York.
No.
Well, our offices are there, but technically we have no building.
You have no buildings. You're just wandering nomads.
Exactly.
I like that. So where do you just show up at whatever country you're spending your semester in?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. And how many of you are there?
There's about 30 of us total.
In each cohort.
Yes, we have like 2 cohorts of 30 people.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's about 15 of you here in Yucatan?
12.
12?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Only half of us could make it due to like the pandemic and
Uh-huh.
closed.
Yeah, the pandemic must have been, just like for the rest of us, must have been terrible for you guys. Yeah, just terrible.
This was a last ditch effort by the parents. We're not, that's why this is Gigi's mom, Angelica.
Hi, Angelica. And you're Wendy, right? Or Wendy?
Yes, hi.
Nice
nice
to
to
see
meet
you.
you.
One of my favorite names, Wendy.
Mother of the lost children, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Perfect job for you, no?
Yeah, it's been super fun, and we just managed to pull it together. The families pulled it together so that Sarah's graduating, several of the others are graduating, and had we not been able to do this, they never would have been able to say goodbye to each other, as well as even meet some of the new students.
Wow.
Yeah, example, Mila, who's in the middle of my screen, wave Mila.
Hi,
She's
Milaf.
a new student this year, and we might not have met her otherwise.
Okay, so Milaf, you're just entering the program. This is your first year. Second.
Just finishing up
Yeah,
her-
yeah, I'm finishing up my first year.
So did you do like the rest of us? I taught face to face throughout the pandemic, but I had hybrid classes. I'm but did you do Zoom classes, kind of like virtual classes for your program? Well, I guess you could do a lot since you're from all over the world, right? So there were a lot of different things you can do. But it's great to see you in another country. It's great to see the world opening up again. And that looks like you're right on top of things. So how did you wind up in Yucatan?
Sheer luck, we found Harvey's facility. Because we were trying to house, find beds for, we didn't know exactly how many, but we needed at least 16, 17. And some of our Mexican students had given us a few cities to look at. Some were too expensive, some maybe not as safe. And then when we found Harvey's space, or Millsaps, I'm sorry, Harvey, but it's always going to be Harvey's space to us.
It's always Harvey's space to me.
It just kind of all unfolded that this was a perfect fit. And then we got to realize how amazing the culture and the history, because in each country, the kids try to dive in and get involved in the community or learn about the community, and it became apparent that this was like a gold mine for them to get out and see some really interesting history. And so we've been to Uxmal, is that how you say it?
Yes, Uxmal.
I get it right? Okay.
Yeah.
We are gonna go to, is it Mayapan?
Yes, Mayapan.
We're doing that this next weekend, and as well as some cenotes, because you gotta do that. So,
Excellent. So you've done then some focus on the Maya, which I suspect is why you're staring at me right now. Right. So I was your age when I became interested in Mesoamerica. And I grew up in New Jersey, just outside, you could see Manhattan from my bedroom window. And so not much Mesoamerica or Maya in New Jersey, but I started reading about it and wound up going to school in New Mexico and then in Cholula at the Universidad de las Americas. So that by the time that I had my undergraduate, I became more and more interested in anthropology and particularly New World anthropology. And part of my position when I teach and talk about it is that most high schools in America have a Western bias in the education. And so people seem to think of themselves as coming from the old world and looking at particularly the classical places like Greece and Rome or Neolithic Europe or places like that. And my point that I've developed is that we live here. And so we look at the dirt and the soil, and we're part of this growth and change and evolution here in this part of the world. And so that got me interested in, well, recognizing that there was so much culture, history, language, diversity, complexity from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego that you have to kind of pick. And I started out in the Southwest working with in Chaco Canyon at the Anasazi, and then I moved in graduate school to central Mexico and worked with the Toltecs, which are the predecessors to the Aztec civilization in central Mexico. But during the time I was in school, I took a bus from Mexico City down to Merida, where you are. And that would have been in 1975 when I first came down here. And at that point, it was a very different city than the one you're visiting, of course. And the landscape was very different. Cancun was just one hotel at that time. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And by the time I went to graduate school, I came down on somebody said, I'm a specialist in ancient pottery. I've published several books on pre-industrial ceramics around the world. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'd like to come down and see Maya pottery because I had never really looked at it carefully. And then I never went back. So in 1984, I became a Mayanist, and I've been working in Yucatan ever since 1984. Originally, I focused on a site called Ekbalam, which is over by Valladolid. And we worked there until 2000. And as a sidebar, which you might be interested in, I think you're the kind of students who would be interested in this, is that I became aware of the impact that tourism and development has on both people and environments. So that archaeology for me became not a passive discipline, but an active discipline. When I showed up at Ekbalam, it was jungle. And when I left Ekbalam, it was parking lots and tour buses, right? And so as a kid growing up, in my 20s and then into my 30s, I watched the impact that we as archaeologists have on environments and on communities, economically, socially, politically, culturally. So my partner, Tomas Gallareta, who's part of the same program that Harvey and I are with Millsaps, he's the Millsaps Scholar of Maya Studies, we decided that we would like to try and do something a little different where we managed the archaeological resources as a way of protecting the environment as opposed to destroying the environment, and also as a way of working with local communities, doing outreach and heritage and preservation management. This led me and my team, which includes Harvey, to search out donors to try and find an area where we could develop this new model for reserves and for archaeological heritage. And that led to us working in a place called Kiwik, which I see, unfortunately, you won't be able to visit, but there's always going to be a hammock with your name on it. So anytime you're in the neighborhood, let me know, and I'll just say, hey, Bey, we were part of the student group, and I say, okay, good. Here, let's go eat some enchiladas, and you could take a swim in the pool and get in the hammock. So anyway, we wound up purchasing through donations of individuals 4,500 acres of tropical forest, which we now, Millsaps, manages as an international nonprofit that we own and operate. And that nonprofit then has an archaeological site it's called Kiwik. Kiwik was probably one of the princes or lower level ranking elites under the control of Uxmal. Uxmal was probably, for us, is like the Paris or London or Rome of that part of the world. And so there are, you may or may not be aware of this, but there are in fact dozens of medium-sized communities, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 that were in the Puuk region. At the time of Uxmal's collapse, around 900 to 1,000, there were probably well over 1 million people living in that area. And today there are less than 20,000 people living in the Puuk region, which I'm not sure we'll get to talk about, or what questions you have about the collapse. So anyway, we wound up saying we wanted to create something different from an Uxmal or a Chichen or even Mayapan, which you're going to visit, in the sense that the archaeology is embedded in an environment that's protected and studied along with the archaeological remains. So at Kiwik, what we've built is an off-the-grid research and learning center. We live out there, solar-powered, wet water waste management. The only thing we need to survive is a propane that we use for the stove. Otherwise, we are completely off the grid. And we do archaeology, but we do it from a perspective of very low impact. So if you come visit me, you'll see that the archaeological site of Kiwik is not all cut open and spread out. It's covered with forest. You know, you would move through the forest. And we also then can manage the plants and animals of the forest, which is part of our responsibility. So for example, we are presently expanding a jaguar conservation program through our facilities. We have 4 of the big cats out at Kiwik, and jaguars are the most endangered. We're presently working with Walt Disney, the Disney Conservation Fund, to support monitoring and education for jaguars in the region. So we try and work with a variety of impacts that extend beyond just the archaeological past. The past exists in the present. We all live here in the present. It's how we think about and control the past and what its utility is. Another thing we do is we do reforestation. So we give out plants and trees and things to communities so that areas that have been deforested for use of firewood and things like that, we can help in those areas too. We've also had education programs. A lot of the smaller communities don't have high schools. And so we would provide possibilities for students to leave communities and go to the municipal capital for high school education. So we try and be good neighbors, you know, that's a different thing too. We don't go away, we're there all the time. And so we want to kind of, I'm really sad that you can't all go to Kiwik, because I would love to be doing this talk with you at Kiwik, because I think what we're trying to do is show that there's alternative ways to develop the archaeological resources and use them in positive ways that connect with the environment and with contemporary Maya people. So that is what I've been doing really for the last 20 years, thankfully through National Geographic and National Science Foundation and Millsaps College, in order to understand the environment and in order to understand the challenges that contemporary indigenous people in the region, the Maya speakers, are facing today. And of course, to try and understand the rise and fall of Maya civilization. So Uxmal, for example, when you go there, who did you go with? Did you have a guide?
We did. We went with the travel service that Harvey recommended, and we had a great guide. His name was Vincente. He worked for the travel. You know, he was our driver and our guide, and he was chock full of great information. Talked about the tree of life, lots of other things.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So one of the first things, did he tell you how old Uxmal was?
Do you guys remember?
Probably, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Do any of you have an idea of the dates of Uxmal? Since that we could play with that because you've been there.
800 AD, 500.
Yeah, good. So most people understand that what you saw, the nunnery, the Temple of the Magicians, the governor's palace. I'm sorry, you can't climb anything these days. They've got, you know, that tape everywhere. But most of what's visible is around 800 to 1000 AD. Much of it, the city was probably 30 to 40,000 people at that time. Now remember, Athens during Plato and Socrates was around 10,000 people. So this was a huge city, right? Uxmal was a very big city and was connected to other cities again that brought, I don't want to say we were an empire, but Uxmal was a very large political state, similar to the early formation of states in Europe, very big. But what the tourists don't realize is that 800 to AD, that was the end of Uxmal, not the beginning of Uxmal. So Uxmal was actually founded around 500 to 600 BC, which makes it over 1,300 years earlier than what people talk about. That's how long people lived at Uxmal. Imagine them living from 500, 600 BC until roughly 900 to 1000 AD. That's 1,500 years roughly of occupation of that city. My little town of Kiwik, which is like, you know, Cleveland compared to Paris or Cleveland compared to New York. The carbon dates from Kiwik are as early as 900 BC, which would suggest almost 2,000 years of occupation, which is kind of cool in the sense that, you know, that we could think about successful environmental adaptation in a region for such a long period of time. They were able to enter an area, develop a complex society, continue living in that complex society, which meant increasing amounts of deforestation, increasing amounts of food production, increasing amounts of, just think how much, okay, each of those buildings was covered in stucco, right? Each of those giant, stucco is made from taking a block of limestone and burning it. The only way you could burn it to make the powder, to make the cement, is to cut down the trees. Imagine how many trees it took to cut down to make all of the cement and stucco just for that one site. And there were sites everywhere. So they were managing a very complex environmental landscape very successfully for 1,500 years, almost 2,000 years, which is one of the things we're interested in studying. What did they do right? Why were they so good at it? How did culture and environment work together? And then why did it fail? And one of the lessons for all of you and for me is that it failed, right? You can go to Chichen, you can go to Mayapan, which is going to be the last gasp. Mayapan comes after Uxmal. Uxmal is abandoned. When you go to Mayapan, it's a walled city. People were jammed in there from all parts of Yucatan because many of the big cities had been abandoned. It was making, modeling itself after the earlier civilization. It was connected to a larger Mesoamerican world, but places like Uxmal and the Puc, where you went, were already abandoned at that time. And so one of the things we're interested in is why civilizations fail. It's kind of fun looking at why civilizations begin. Why is it that, you know, Mila and Hannah and Sammy there get together out in the middle of the woods and suddenly they're building pyramids and creating glyphs and social complexity and all of this. And next thing you know, you've got 1 million people living out there doing some really fun stuff. But it's a bit more problematic when you try and focus on what caused the failure of this. And for you and for me, the lesson is not so much on the origins, but on the ends, right? Because the planet itself is kind of like a larger version of the Puc. If civilizations can grow, civilizations can fail. And so I try and teach, man, we almost saw it in the United States or in the world. The pandemic put us all on edge, didn't it? I mean, people trapped, businesses collapsing, ecosystems not being able to be regulated. It was, for an anthropologist like me, a very fascinating period because it looked like we were experiencing some really intensive trauma to the nature of civilization on the planet. So yeah, that's, I could talk to you about just about anything in terms of your interest with the civilization. So if you have some questions for me, I would love to answer them. I appreciate you. Oh yeah, you saw the video. So you got that whole shtick, right? So the whole thing about the collapse is in there. And my thinking, which is that that they push their environmental capacity to the limit. And so a drought would push them over the edge, which is what I still think happened. I think there's no water there, right? That your guide talked to you about that, right?
Cistern and all of the cistern.
Yeah, right. I give the same shtick like in the video. There's no rivers, there are no streams, there are no lakes, there's nothing except cave water and rainwater. So Uxmal was built by controlling rainwater, which is amazing, right? To build I don't know if there's any other civilization on the planet that was designed around water management, which is one reason why they thought that the Maya only came to that part of the world around 800, because man, you have to be really smart to manage water like that. But no, we're finding out that they were able to manage the water systems even as early as 800 or 900 BC. I don't know if you've talked about LIDAR or if you know what LIDAR is, but LIDAR allows us to look over the jungle and just peel it all off so we could see the ground.
Without having to touch the canopy, right? Without touching.
Yeah, so basically now I could see everything that's under the trees without. In the old days, if I had you four that I'm looking at here, I would put you in a team and you would spend years walking through the forest trying to find things. Nowadays, the LIDAR shows us exactly where the things are, and I just give you GPS and send you out there and you walk right to it, right? So what used to take years now takes months to do. It's speeding up our work. It's speeding up the amount of data that we're bringing in. And some of the cool things we're finding is that very early on, the Maya are building reservoirs for rain catchment. Some of them are half a mile long, half a kilometer long that they're using. So they're very sophisticated water management systems people. Anyway, I do think that they were so successful that at the end, it would take not much time for the drought to put a lot of pressure on the communities. And I also argue again in the video, as you know, that I don't think that the big question was why they left, but why they don't come back. You know,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I.
About your theories about that. Do you have any theories about that?
Yeah, I do actually. As you may have garnered from the videos, I have been fortunate enough. Key Week is enough off the beaten path that we have found evidence of abandonment. So at Uxmal, it's hard to see what happened. The details are missing for a lot of reasons. At Key Week, for example, my big palace, which I'll be excavating the throne room this summer, the big palace was actually under construction at the time of the abandonment. So I think I talk about that in the video too, that there are parts of the buildings where they're actually laying out the stones or building construction frameworks and then just stop. So it's not this idea with the elites that, oh, it's a slow decay, you know, and you and I are huddled in our houses, slowly starving to death. It was something where they were building their mansions and spending money like crazy. And then they put down the tools and they walked away. And then one of the smaller plantation sites, you know, hacienda kind of things that I've excavated, Stairway to Heaven, up on the hill, they literally were taking the goods from their homes and packing them up in parts of the house. They were preparing to go away. They weren't running, oh my God, we're running for the hills. Oh my, no. They were like taking their time, packing things up, knowing they were leaving. And if you do that, my assumption, may be wrong, may be right. My assumption is that they thought they were coming back. They wanted to make things, leave things in a good enough condition that when they came back, and I think the elites were thinking that they were going to come back as well. So this leads, Sarah, right? Yeah, this leads to the next point, which is, I think that the Maya were probably, given my rant a few minutes ago about water management, I think they were some of the best water managers in the world and had been for over 1,000 years. So I don't think that a drought was like something they had never seen in 1,000 years. I think that they probably were like responding to drought like we respond to natural disasters in our own countries, that we suffer and then we bounce back, right? We figure out a way to come back. Typically, we hope. You know, Nepal has an earthquake. Well, after the earthquake, Kathmandu gets rebuilt. You know, the money comes in, they rebuild it. So I think that that's why I believe that the Maya were prepared for these kinds of experiences. And so when they left, they thought they were coming back, which leads to your question, why don't they come back? And I usually use in class something that was very close to my life, which was, I'm just outside of New Orleans, which was Katrina. And Hurricane Katrina devastated the city of New Orleans. I was fortunate enough to be among the first people that were allowed to go back into the city when it opened. So weird going into a city of over 1 million people and there's hardly anyone there except men with machine guns and a few people huddled in their houses. It's really incredible. The city was abandoned, right? Quickly, rapid abandonment. You look at houses, people just they didn't know they were going to be gone for 6 months or a year or forever when they left New Orleans. They thought, oh, it's a hurricane, we'll be back. So the question becomes, why is New Orleans successful now? I mean, my son's going to get married in New Orleans in October at the Cabildo right next to the St. Louis Cathedral. The city is booming again. Why were they able to go back to New Orleans? Anybody have an idea what was necessary for them to reoccupy this abandoned region? Anyone? Kiana, Hannah, Harvey?
Governmental support.
Boom, governmental support. Without the National Guard, without the Army Corps of Engineers, without billions of federal and state dollars, my family, my friends, no one could go back to the city on their own. They needed an organization, right, to do that. And so I think that's part of the equation with the return of the Maya, was they needed organization and support to go back in there. So next step would be that something happened at the upper levels of Maya society that made it impossible for the elites and the structures and the funding to operate, to get people like you and me, the farmers back, the traders back, the families back, to go back in there, because we can't do it on our own. You just can't do it. You know, who's your market? Yeah, you're gonna had a question?
Well, I was wondering if it's also possible that once they got there, not that they lost their desire to go back, but or so much time passed that with droughts and their ability to go back, that the family history didn't have as much of an urgency to go back.
Yeah, Wendy, that's a really cool question too. When they leave, they went just, it's only a few hours walk to up where you all are. A couple days gets you up there. And the Maya never left there, right? Merida is a Maya city, Tijo. I mean, the Maya people in the north never disappeared. It's the Puc region, that's beautiful soils and forests that they just abandoned. And I think you're right. I think once they got up to the north, the rich elites lost power and control, and local people like you and me would just get reabsorbed into other communities and towns. And why the hell should we go back to the Puc when you can't make it safe for us and you can't provide markets and things like that? And the water management is so sophisticated that if me and Sarah can't do it, we need the state to come in and help construct that and manage those sorts of things. So yeah, I think that it's really not a failure of will so much as a failure of ability, of structure and ability among the elites to reoccupy that zone, which is why they don't go back. But also, which I think is really sexy, that goes along with your question, is on these pyramids, if I took you out to one that had not been touristified, I'm good at making up words. Yeah, they're touristized that, and you and I cleaned it and looked at it carefully, we will almost invariably find incense burners that were placed on the pyramids. Sometimes big, beautiful knives, other objects placed as offerings on the pyramids. And so somebody came back maybe 100, 150 years after the abandonment, and they were still making offerings at the pyramids. that's where I think you're right. I think they had a social memory of those places. Your family, my family, we would occasionally go back and make offerings there. Or I have also talked about the idea that maybe the elites were doing it to try and control ownership of the real estate. They didn't want to let go of that valuable property and land. So we had an analysis done of the clays made of the incense burners because we wanted to know where these people were coming from. And interestingly enough, some of the incense burners are from Mayapan. The people the site you're going to visit, we're sending people all the way down past Uxmal to sites like ours. So we think that some of the families wound up in Mayapan, right? The other ones, which is what the big surprise for me, Belize. Some of the people, right? So when they abandoned the Pook, some went north where you are, but others went south down into further into into Belize and into Guatemala, and they were still coming up there too. So you kind of look at the abandonment as kind of a spreading out of people in different directions, but also this idea that, like you're saying, that they had connections to these communities. And this is one of the ways we're finding out they continued to try and show their relationships to these towns. So, almost like if you were from some city and your parents had moved away and your grandparents had been there, you go back and make an offering at the cathedral or something like that and leave an offering representing your connections to that community. So what are the kind of questions you got?
Well, for me, it's really interesting. Like, I understand, like, that you would leave the tiny cities or the tiny establishment, but what about Uxmal and places like that? Wouldn't they want to go back to these bigger cities that they had power?
Okay. And who's writing this material? Because these are great questions. So, one of the things that you may not have been shown at Uxmal is that, in fact, people did try and come back there. And that there are, one of the articles I wrote about Uxmal is a type of building that was constructed very late in the history of the city. They're crappy, right? They're not beautiful like the buildings you saw. And what was fascinating for me when I began to study them was that they were perishable structures. They were thatch and wood, but the foundations were made of stone. And so when I started examining the stones, I realized these stones were being reutilized from the beautiful buildings. So you saw the ball court, right, at Uxmal? I could show you a building where the foundation of the building is constructed of stones taken from the ball court. Right? Okay, think about that. I don't know if you noticed, but you went in the nunnery, right? The big square. And right in the middle is a crappy building. I don't know if most people don't pay any attention to it, but it's a C-shaped structure because it's shaped like this. And it was just a thatched structure. And I said to myself, it wasn't even on the maps when they would do the maps because it was so unimpressive. And I said, what the hell's that building doing there? This is like building, a garden shed in front of the White House. This is not where you're supposed to see a building like this. And so, coming to your question, I examined the stones of the foundation, and guess what? The stones were from the buildings themselves. They had fallen off and they were being reutilized to make the foundations. These were people that I'm arguing were not squatters, but and I'll tell you why. They were the remaining people who did try to come back, but there was no energetics, there was no power structure. The elites could not build new, exciting buildings. They were building these little crappy thatch structures using the buildings that their grandparents had made that were now falling apart. And people said to me, well, they could just be squatters coming in late. So what does a good archaeologist do? We look at the ceramics. So we looked at the ceramics from these buildings, and guess what? The ceramics are the exact same pottery that the people who built the big buildings were using. They were the same people. They were just now living in crappy, perishable structures. So to answer your question, yes, Uxmal, the people of Uxmal made an effort to come back to the city, and obviously it failed in the long run. But I would suspect that these were probably the elite families trying to grab some foothold on that city, because to give up a city like Uxmal, like you say, you know, that's like giving up Chicago or Manhattan, right? Or Berlin. I mean, so imagine how traumatic that would be for the people living in, like, you know, Cleveland, and then and they're looking at Chicago as just a wasteland. So, you know, maybe families would try to go back to Chicago, but they can't get it running again. So when you go to Mayapan, that's the efforts of all the rich families, the most important families from all over the northern Maya lowlands come together after the collapse. Because in some ways, you know, Chichen collapses. You don't see any Mayan pyramids in Merida, do you? They abandon Merida, collapses. Ekbalam, Koba, all these sites. These families, who were very rich, imagine great families from Angkor in Cambodia, or the amazing families from India or Europe, these royal families trying to figure out what the hell are we going to do now? So they come together as a confederation of families from all different cities, and they create Mayapan and build a wall around it. It's super jammed. I mean, ask your guide to show you a map of Mayapan, okay? The people are just like this. Everybody's living on top of each other, inside and outside the walls. And it's an attempt to revitalize Maya civilization, and it also fails. So that by the time the Spanish arrive in the 16th century, what you have are a number of small Mayan states that are loosely confederated and not very powerful, and were not able to organize in any significant way at that time against the Spanish. But they were there. If you go to Tulum, over on the East Coast, Tulum was probably occupied at the time that Cortez came along the coast. He probably saw places like that. The Maya kind of congregate along the Caribbean so that they could get more in touch with other cultures that could bring goods down and things like that. So important point to recognize in my rant about collapse is the Maya don't disappear, right? There are millions of Maya speakers. And not just in Yucatan where they speak Yucatec Maya, but there are some 26 distinct Maya languages still spoken. In Guatemala, the majority of people speak Maya. It's the only country in the Americas where the majority of the inhabitants are native speakers, about 60%. So have you heard Maya? Have you heard? Pardon?
Do you know? I have.
So have you heard some words in Maya?
Yes, I have.
Okay, where did you hear them?
In like a family by a cenote that we went.
Okay, so they were Maya speakers.
Yes, they were.
Right. The majority of people in the state that you're in are still Maya speakers at home, right? Okay, I'll answer your question, Victoria. Thank you. So that just, the point is the Maya don't disappear, right? When somebody says, what happened to the Maya or the mysterious Maya? Well, the Maya people are all around you. They just lost that upper level civilization that you see in those archaeological sites, the building. It's like the building of their great churches and the building of their great palaces, and all of that stops. But for you and me as average farmers, as average people, we continue to subsist, right? So yeah, so the Maya language is a glottal tonal language. It has nothing to do with any European language. It is a distinct language, and the people there are distinct, you know, so, and it's a wonderful language. So for example, you would walking down a path, you would say Bishabel, which means how goes your road? And they would say Chembeya, which means my road goes just like that, just fine. And say, you know, and you see little kids, you go, Bashkuatlik, Tech, which is, what are you doing? And they, just like any kid around the world, will say, you know, Mishba, I'm not doing anything. So when you get out and listen like you were doing, or you spend time outside of Merida or Valladolid or the tourist zones, you will hear the majority of speakers still speak Maya. Small communities. I live in Oshkutskab. It's about 32,000 people when I'm not at the reserve, and Maya is spoken in the homes there. They speak Maya. So I had a question here from Victoria. Victoria, you're from Estonia. That's super cool. One of my students is second in charge diplomatically from Estonia in the Ukraine right now. So it's one of my goals is to visit him in Estonia. Okay, or is that just your last name? Is Victoria from Estonia?
Yeah. Yes, she's from Estonia.
And I'm a little worried about Belarus this morning, Victoria. Those Belarus people are kind of acting odd. So the words cenote and ushmal, yes. Ushmal, ush is actually osh. It's humpe kape oshpe, which means three, right? Three. And mal comes from pyramid or big stone places. So it's the place of three big mounds. Now I live in Osh or Ush Kotskab, which means three. Kuts is Turkey and Kab is tobacco. Ush becomes a metaphor or a symbol for a lot. Like three becomes a lot. Okay, so Ushmal means really in local kind of mindset, the place where there's a lot of pyramids, which makes sense, right? It is not what the city was called in the past. It's a historic name for it. Sanot, right? Zenot, it comes from, let me see if I can get this one right. I don't want to make something up. It's a Maya word, but it comes from zinot, which has to do just with the opening of the hole to the water. There's a whole set of Maya words that tell you the depression. Some of them go a little bit deep. Some of them go all the way to the water. When they connect with the water, they are called cenotes. Sometimes they don't go all the way down like you see if you've been to a cenote. And the ancient Maya were not stupid. So they knew the water was closer at the bottom of a depression than it was at the surface. So we'll be out in the woods and we'll find a depression, and they will have dug down beautiful little stone-lined wells that would take them to the water. So you could be out in the middle of the jungle and you'll look down into these little holes in the water, and little blind fish will look up. Well, they won't really see you, but they'll look up at you while you're out in there. Now, another thing you may or may not know about the cenotes is that the great asteroid hit right where you are, Chicxulub, right?
Cenotes?
Well, what happened was 65 million years ago when Chicxulub, the asteroid hits right off the coast. So if you look on, you can see aerial photos where you see the rings of this giant impact crater. That impact crater over 65 million years has weakened this line, and they call it the ring of the cenotes because the cenotes kind of parallel in some ways right along the edge of the impact crater. So where it's too...
George, I'm going to share with them a photo of it while you're talking.
Okay. Yes. So if you get up where Uxmal is, you'll notice you had to go up to a little hill. Yeah, there it is. You had to climb up a little bit because the Uxmal is up in the Puk for a very good reason. That part of Yucatan has the best soils. If scroll, yeah, there you go. You can see you can see the cenote ring of cenotes. But also, if you head further east, you can see there's a buttload of cenotes further.
The crater's here, right?
Right. Could you scroll down just a little bit where you were? The other way? The other direction? You step right there. So you can see here Uxmal on this map, and that little gray area, which is just gray due to trying to highlight the color, that's the old Yucatan Peninsula. That, what you're looking at there, where Tikul is, which is right by where I live, Tikul is the beach. So if you were here 65 million years ago, you wouldn't have been, Merida and all of this area was underwater. Uxmal and that gray area was the old peninsula. Since the sea levels have risen and then dropped, what you have now is the present day Yucatan. Point being that the gray area has the oldest soils, best dirt, more dirt. We love the dirt. Today, big citrus companies are coming in because they could grow oranges and avocados and all of this in that good dirt. The problem was and is because that soil is higher and older, there are no cenotes in the Puc region. Back to my little song and dance, no river streams, standing bodies of water in that region. So it was always a conundrum for the Maya: best soils, least amount of water.
So cool.
Super cool.
Yeah.
What else?
I
I
have
have a
a
question.
Hannah Westfall. Where are you from?
I'm from California.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I am a little confused on the timeline. So when the colonizers, yeah,
oh, go ahead.
When the colonizers came in and we heard that they used the stones from the pyramids to build the same basis for their cathedral.
The cathedral downtown is built out of the stone.
Yeah. Why did they just not find some of the pyramids, or why were some destroyed and some weren't, or were they all destroyed and the ones we see now just rebuilt?
That's a good question. Okay, think about it this way. You and I are here, it's 1540s. We're Maya. Many of the best cities have been abandoned due to the historic processes. And from Chichen, you and I are going to Chichen to make offerings. So we know it's there, but we don't live there or work there. Places like Uxmal and up in the Puc are almost totally abandoned. There's just a lot of people have moved to the coast. They're doing trading along the coasts, moving goods in big canoes and things like that. Political power is kind of diffused. And so the Spanish show up. And first of all, when they show up, Montejo and the younger and Montejo the elder, there are not a lot of them, right? So you have to think of hundreds of thousands of Maya people and hundreds of Spanish people. So the first thing they do in the 1500s is they try to create some bases of operations, and they set up 4 cities, 4 towns: Merida, where you are, Valladolid, which was called Zaki, Campeche to the south west, and to the southeast, Chetumal. And so these were the kind of basic outposts of Spanish civilization. They were looking for gold. There was no gold down here. There's only limestone. All we have is plants and animals and fruits and salts and limestone. So there wasn't a lot of attraction early on for like in Peru or in central Mexico for a lot of immigration. So part of, to answer your question, where they were, they would use the cut stones. So if I'm in Merida, Tijol was largely abandoned. So there were pyramids. We just unpack them and use them. In places like Uxmal or even in Chichen, there was no one really there to do it. And so they would just sit there unimpacted. Really, to show you even at a micro level, you probably didn't notice, but the ball court at Uxmal is all fracked up. All the stones are really gone from the interior of the ball court. That's because some Spaniards built a hacienda out there and they dismantled the ball court. That's all the stones they needed, right? So they dismantled the ball court for the hacienda and they left other things in place. So really was it when we need it, we do it. There's not a lot of us. Some of the sites are horribly impacted. Others are basically left alone.
So it's more of a resources thing than like a religious or like the Spanish.
Right. Oh yeah, they were
destructive.
not. Yeah, they weren't in the mood to dismantle pyramids systematically for religious purposes. You're absolutely right. They were dismantling them, and Hannah, they continue to do that today. That's one of the things we have to worry about. If there's a pyramid next to a small temple or something next to the highway, and you and I are going to build a little ranch out there, well, where are we going to go to get lovely cut stones? I could take you to haciendas and ranches all over the peninsula that are built out of Maya stonework. Yep, it was a resource. It continues to be a resource. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, to what extent? This is from Memitla and Teddy.
Metla.
Say that again.
Metla.
Matla?
Just drop the first M. Metla.
Oh, just drop the first M. Okay, Metla and Teddy. Okay, so let's do this one. If what extent was Uxmal and Mayan civilization environmentally sustainable? That's a super complicated question, right? Because you have to. Let me just give you a little background, and we'll talk about this. The Maya civilization extended from where you are all the way south through Guatemala into Honduras, down up through Chiapas, and into parts of the coast, Tabasco, et cetera, et cetera. So it covered a vast area of very different environments. When I say there's no floating water in the Puc, that doesn't mean in Guatemala there weren't tons of rivers and lakes and streams for those Maya. So they were dealing with a very different set of environmental issues. It looks like in some cases, Metla and Teddy, that the Maya were able to practice sustainable growth and development and agricultural and agroforestry management for 1,000 years. In some cases, it doesn't look like certain political units or states were actually degrading their environment significantly, even at the time of collapse. So others might have been like the one we're talking about with the Puc, where there's not so much evidence of a breakdown of sustainable living. It's just that they were so successful that they became more and more fragile to something like drought. That the drought could have had a greater impact on 1 million people than it would have had on 10,000 people, right? But there are places that I could take you all, such as Tikal in the center of the peninsula down in Guatemala, where we have done cores into the lake Petén nearby the site, and the soil profiles indicate that they had almost sterilized the area. The pollen, the trees were gone. Pollen indicates massive deforestation. And so a site like Tikal, we believe, was actually living in an unsustainable fashion. Copan in Honduras is another one where it looks like they had deforested all the hills around the site, around the city, and were pushing their ability to create a sustainable living from there. But I could tell you, there's other places I could take you to, like Dos Pilas, a beautiful little city, where there is absolutely no evidence of environmental breakdown. they were living in a sustainable fashion. Something else happened there, though, where we see endemic, continued, and massive warfare to the point that it was down to almost every household had a wall around it to protect itself. But so there's environmental sustainability. There's also cultural sustainability too. Something happened there that had nothing to do with the environment so much. I like to tell people, and you are your people, I like to tell you that the collapse of Maya civilization begins around 750 and ends around 1000 AD. So it took about 250 years for the whole thing to fall apart, right? Which is when I'm talking to my students about America, which I like to scare people. I say, right, America may be collapsing and you don't even know it because it takes so long to happen. You know, Hannah is over in California, right? I look at California and I'm saying, oh my God, they have water problems, they have fire problems, they have all kinds of different problems.
It's all going downhill.
Yeah, you see what I know. My brother lives outside LA in Cucamonga, and we talk about it all the time. I mean, you have a particular set of environmental issues. You guys suck all the water from half the West, right? And it's been going on for 100 years now. So is that sustainable? I don't know. You know, we could create massive, my students tend to think that whatever happens in America, we can solve any problem. You know, it doesn't matter how bad it gets, we'll come up with the solution. You know, maybe y'all will come up with desalination islands that will produce huge amounts of water off the coast of California. But what I like to say is, you know, California has its issues. The Southeast has its issues. I'm sick and tired of hurricanes and tornadoes down here, and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse every year. You know, they stormed the White House. That doesn't create political stability for me. I mean, a Capitol building. So, I mean, so you have different kinds of pressures. I said to the students in my class, Rise and Fall, I'll say, okay, what happens if there's a massive earthquake in California while we're having an economic depression or recession? Meanwhile, we have an outbreak of incidents of terrorism on the East Coast. The borders break down. Things are even worse in Mexico, or vice versa. And people are just moving back and forth across the border in greater numbers. Meanwhile, we have a series of hurricanes that destroy New Orleans and Orlando and Miami, and we don't have the money to fix those places. Puerto Rico gets hit again, and massive flooding in the Mississippi River Valley. How much stress can the system take before it starts to break apart, right? That's the question. How much can...
I'm building my bunker now.
Yeah, you build your bunker. Right? So that idea that systems are resilient, I think we as humans are resilient, but it comes to the question of how resilient are we? You know, so when does California say, we've had it, we're going to create an independent nation state and you can't stop us, and we're going our own way, you know? And the Southeast just stops getting money from the federal government and they collapse. So you see what I'm saying? We could see a breakdown of America. No, Harvey's heard this. No empire, and we are an empire because we have military in 123 countries around the world. That's an empire. We are an economics, political, cultural, and military empire. No empire has ever continued to be successful. They all collapse sooner or later. They've historically. Some are quiet. Look at the Soviet Union. They went down without a whimper. And now they're trying to recreate the Soviet Empire again. That's what my son studies over in Europe. The Putin's trying to recreate empire with, so that's that. Oh, Sammy had to leave. Well, I hope you tell Sammy what I said.
Sorry, I had a quick question.
Are you Mila or Kiana?
I'm Kiana.
Hi, Kiana. Where are you from?
I'm from Canada and Iran.
Okay.
So when we visited the ruins, I saw that there were like animal heads, and the guy explained about it more, but I was wondering, did they use it for more decoration purposes, or was it some superstition of, protecting their area? And I don't know. I find it quite interesting that they use like animal heads to put
Okay,
on there.
where did you see them? On buildings?
Yeah, just like mentioned, there's like a snake head that they carved
Right.
into the stones, and I just found it quite interesting if they had any.
Yeah, let me kind of tell you, Kiana, the Maya were not too much into decorative art. Everything you see on those buildings was symbolically important. Every animal had mythological basis and also social and political kind of implications too. The serpent that you see everywhere appears, it's related to this, something I wrote about called the cult of Quetzalcoatl, which is the spread of these feathered serpents from central Mexico through Uxmal, Chichen, and other places, so that the serpents themselves were representative of religious and political ideology. The jaguars, we love jaguars. So jaguars are like the jaguar. If I was a king or you were a queen, we would wear jaguar skin. We'd make our furnitures out of jaguars. That's how we operated. So even turtles and things like that were all associated with the kind of myths. The Maya thought that
George, you see Eric walking behind you.
Yeah,
Yeah, they all just got here.
Do I have to go out there, or are they okay?
I'll see them on Monday night.
Yeah, they just walked across Hannah's screen.
Keep them away from me.
Tell Eric to put his face in somebody's computer.
Okay, I just wanted to finish telling Mila and Kiana this, and then you could leave me and run off and
Sorry about that.
Eat them tacos. Hey, so anyway, even turtles, the Maya thought that the world rested on the back of a turtle, that mountains and valleys were the cracks and crags of a great turtle. So the turtle then would move, and that's what would cause earthquakes. So earthquakes, so you'll see a building like at Uxmal that's covered in turtles, little turtles all around. And you say, well, that's cute. Well, that building was probably super important in terms of the ideas of creation and organization of the cosmos. So Kiana, the Maya took everything from ants and scorpions through rabbits and turtles, through jaguars and snakes. They all served religion, politics, and culture.
Brilliant.
Fascinating.
That's.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for all the generosity of your time. We really didn't expect to be able to get all this information.
Yeah.
This was a real gift.
Well, I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Oh my gosh.
That's great. That's really amazing.
No, we want to come to Kiwi sometime. I think we might be making a trip back.
Okay, if you do, let's work together, and I would love to show you not just Kiwi and the reserve, but explore the Pook. There are many cities and places where.
Some of your.
What?
Some...
Oh, where are they? Hold on, are they there?
They're on Metla's and Teddy's screen. Someone from your class, maybe?
Dr. Bey?
Oh, that's my student. Dear, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, I'm missing you.
I'm missing you too. We missing you down here. What's going on?
I'll be down on Monday night. And then I'll be down there until the end of July. So I'm going to be down a long time. Good.
Back to class.
So great to see you. Bye. Bye.
George, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful rest of your trip. And thank you so much for your interest and for coming to Casa Milsaps and being in Yucatan.
And all you guys, thank you for seeing you again. Good to see you again. I will, if you need anything, give me a holler and we'll chat later.
Perfect. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. It was
Great
really
time.
wonderful.
My pleasure. See y'all.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.